So I said in my last video that it would always be my intention that anytime I started a new campaign, you could only start with humans as a selectable race. I did actually start a campaign a number of months ago, and I immediately broke that rule, or at least made for myself an exception. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about a house rule that I created. That may sound kind of funny. It's a house system. Literally every rule is a house rule, but this one is one that's not technically part of the system. It's one that I specifically made optional and did not incorporate it into the document. So it's something that I wouldn't necessarily always do. And that is that you can select a patron or contact at the start of play. And you can also acquire them at other points during play if you wish to. What they do is they take up a slot in your equipment. You can actually make them so they take up even more slots if you want to have a stronger relationship with these patrons. And if you need help that is up their alley, you can make a contact roll to see if they can help you. And obviously first you got to get in contact with the patron. If you're out in the middle of the woods, you can't recite a little rhyme and they show up like Tom Bombadil. You have to go back to town where they live or whatever. So it's not quite as simple as that, but they can help you out in a lot of ways. And some of them are like scholars or sages. They can give you advice. They can translate things. They can tell you about things that you otherwise wouldn't have any reason to know. That can be extremely helpful in the pursuit of whatever adventure you're in. Some of them might have access to equipment that you could loan or borrow or even buy or even just be given, depending on how successful you are in making a roll, to get them to help you. And that's how you do it, is if you go ask them for any kind of help, or you try to contact them and try to get some help out of them, you make a contact roll. As you roll a d20, you add your character level, you hit a DC, which will vary depending on what exactly you're asking for and how reasonable it is, and how, if the GM says, well, that's pretty reasonable, it's going to be relatively low DC. If it's something that's really kind of outrageous, you may still be successful, but your DC will probably be extremely high. The other thing, if you take more than one slot to increase your relationship, if you take 2 slots, for example, when you make this roll, you can actually roll 2 d20s and take the better of the 2. You can also increase it even one more time and take 3 slots. You can't take more than that with a single contact, but you can take up to 3, and then you roll 3 d20s and pick the better of the best of the 3. It does, however, take a slot of your equipment, so it's probably not something you want to do very often. Just from a strategic standpoint, obviously the best way to do this is if you have lots of characters in your group, 3 to 4 or 5. I think 3 to 5 is my preferred number of group size. I had 4 for this particular group. They all took a contact. They all took different contacts. They all only took 1 slot. I actually didn't explain the whole. You could do more than 1 because I didn't really want them doing that. So I had several characters. All of my characters, in fact, took a patron. One of them took a patron that, among other things that it did, is it allowed access to the orc and goblin race. So he picked an orc and created an orc. So that is the exception to my rule. Let me talk a little bit about the contacts that I gave. First off, I showed them, and it's been up here on the screen this whole time. I showed them this sheet which I created, which had an image of all of the potential contacts, and then I also had a couple sheets that kind of explained what each one did. It was 2 pages. It was a little longer than I would have liked, but they were able to get enough information to choose a patron carefully. So let me go through each of them very quickly. I'm going to summarize rather than read the information that I gave them. So the first one is Professor Alpen von Lechfield. He's a semi-retired professor who used to be in Timmisburg in the town of Mittermarkt, where he made quite the name for himself. He retired in dramatic fashion after the death of his wife, settled in the hill country, out kind of in a rural part of the hill country with his teenage daughter, and he works there. He's an expert on all kinds of occult things, supernatural monsters. In fact, he has a dispensation from all of the various governments nearby to research and even have items and other things that would be illegal otherwise, because he has demonstrated his trustworthiness in the only reason that he wants to know this stuff is so that he can put it down. He's not interested in power for its own sake. He's interested in ending the power of other supernatural threats and monsters. If you are his contact, then he also knows that you can be trusted to help do this. He probably would be a font in some ways of side quests. He can also be reached by bird, by raven, or even by carrier pigeon if needed, if you're not anywhere near him. And because his reputation is pretty stellar, if you were in any other city with any kind of academy or university, he probably has contacts, people who know him quite well, who can give a lot of the same information that he would give, as long as they're confident that you are indeed a friend of his. Dranson Hugh is the next guy. He's also an academic, a sage. He's a Zobnan scholar, as you can see from his picture. He's from Lomar, although he spends a lot of time doing these kind of guest lecturer gigs. He's a little bit younger than he looks. He's kind of a gadfly and man about town. He likes to go to parties. He likes to live the high life, but he really knows his stuff, and his stuff that he really knows is anything historical. He's not really very interested in near history. He's not interested in history of, the Hillmen, for instance, because from his perspective, they didn't even show up till recently. He's interested. The older, the more obscure, the more interesting it is to him, and he is the foremost expert in the entire area on them. He's the foremost expert on the heresiarchs, which are kind of my version of the 10 who were taken, if you will. They play a similar role in the campaign, I guess, although much more in the background than the 10 who were taken are in the Black Company. He's a confirmed bachelor. He can be a little bit more easily convinced if you bring him some kind of exotic, delight, as I don't want to say as a bribe, but something to kind of put him in the mood to talk to you. He can even be convinced, if something is really up his alley, to come along as a guide and on-site expert. Although if you do, he'll probably bring like 2 pack horses full of decadent luxuries and ridiculously luxurious clothing that doesn't make any sense for what he's doing. But like I said, he's a real expert. He really knows his stuff. If you know him and you need to know something, he's the guy. Shul is next. Oh, I'm also sorry, before I talk about Shul, having Hugh as a contact also unlocks the Gray Man race, because he's a Gray Man, right? So that means you start the game with him as a contact. You obviously know about Graymen, so you could be one. Shul is another subject matter expert. He's kind of the typical underworld information broker. He's a little goblin. He seems to somehow know everybody and everything in the criminal world, and he's got friends, contacts, informants everywhere he goes. He's also kind of an interesting liaison to the PCs if you need any criminal services, if you need to talk to any smugglers, black marketeers, fences, if you need bodyguards or protection or whatever. He's your guy. He does hate the Chersky Mafia, so you be careful depending on what you're doing in the criminal underworld. That could get you into trouble, because he's got a real bad thing about them. He's also got this rat with him all the time that it's in his pocket, on his shoulder. He puts it on his arm and talks to it. And some people swear up and down that the rat talks back, and in fact that the rat is the source of all his information. He's not necessarily as in with all of the criminal gangster leaders as he seems to be, but he seems to know everything. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's close to the rat. Every rat in every city is his spy, and they all communicate to him. Of course, a lot of other people say that's stupid, superstitious nonsense. Nobody really knows. If Shul is your contact, you can also pick an orc and goblin as PC races. Oysen Dughall is next. He's a big woodwoes. He's used to work for the Chersky Mafia, as many urban woodwoses did, as kind of a shakedown and protection racket thug. And he had a falling out. He's been out for a number of years. So now he's kind of paranoid, kind of always looking around. Sometimes when you're talking to him, he'll just stop and listen to something only he can hear, and then he'll come back. But he knows his stuff outside. And if you are anywhere in the hill country or even, the northern part of along the Great Northern Road, Samashki and whatnot, he is your absolute expert. He knows more about the backwoods than anybody. He's a friend to many other people who make a living out in the wild, hunters, trappers, homesteaders. They all trust him. If they are convinced that you're a friend of his, they can help you too because they all like him. What he's really good for, obviously he can be consulted. Because he's always on the move and doesn't stay in one place and doesn't really like to go into towns very often, he can even be convinced to travel with you for short periods of time. I'm talking only a few days or a week or so tops. But if you do get him to come along, he is an absolute expert guide. Any checks you made for anything out in the wilderness to avoid getting lost, to forage for food, to avoid stumbling across dangerous wild animals or bandits or anything else, he will make them with you'll make them as normal, but you'll add a +5 because of his advice. And like I said, this is only for short distances. He'll kind of, especially as you get near a destination, even a town, city, or even a little village, chances are he'll wander off before you go into town. Brythe Armeld is our next contact. She's a young sorceress prodigy. She was a student at the academy in Barrowmere. She's very brilliant, but very acerbic, very arrogant, kind of hard to like. She is also an object lesson on exactly why people don't do sorcery and witchcraft and why it's illegal and dangerous. So she used to be this beautiful young woman. She's still beautiful after a fashion, but she doesn't even look remotely human. And her exposure to this magic that she has done has mutated and changed her. She's now what is called a non-born cambion. A cambion, of course, is somebody who's born a half-demon with a demon parent and a human parent. A non-born cambion is a cambion who becomes one through some kind of curse or exposure to magic. Because this has happened to her, she never leaves her tower, but by some curious effect, she seems to have identical towers, or maybe it's the same tower, in many cities across the region. And if you go to see her, then there's a pretty good chance that she'll be in them. She seems to be able to move between them at will, which is why some people who know her think that it actually is the same tower that somehow manifests in different geographical spaces simultaneously. And nobody really knows the secret of this. They do know she's a sorcerer's prodigy. If she's your contact, she's a great source for any questions about any kind of magic. She could even give you spells if you're interested in them and if she thinks that you can handle them. She can teach you how to do stuff. She can have access to books. She's also a font of side quests because she's constantly looking for some way to reverse her condition and become once again a beautiful young woman that she used to be. The problem, of course, is she's very bitter about what's happened to her, and this is reflected in her arrogant and angry approach to the world. She doesn't accept any responsibility for her condition. She hates the world, her former teachers, anyone else that she can rationalize as someone to blame other than herself. So, she's a little bit abrasive, but if she's your contact, that means she trusts you in spite of her, the way she treats you, and it's something that you probably know her well enough that you just kind of accept that. Dean Bannermain is next. He's a hillman, but he grew up in Samashki as he was kind of just an orphan boy in the streets, and he became very, very good at surviving in the streets. First he was a pickpocket, then a small-time con artist. Later he became a cat burglar, an entry specialist. But he always had in mind this vision that there's a place at home where he didn't have to be a criminal among his own people. And so he had this kind of vague idea that someday he was going to go to the hill country and be, no longer be a criminal. He'd be among his own people. He'd be, just a upstanding citizen. He had kind of not really taken this dream too seriously until one of his friends was killed in some kind of accident in a rash job that went wrong. And he cashed out with all his fences and traveled by coach across the Great Northern Road in style, where by bad luck he was robbed by bandits almost as soon as he arrived technically across the borders of the hill country. So, yeah, that was kind of a setback, but he still had the skills. He started doing what he did best again, although it kind of galled him to be doing it among his own people. But before long, he started rebuilding his fortune. One night he robbed the wrong house, though, or maybe it was the right house, and it turned out that the guy who did was a member of the Rangers, and was looking for somebody with his skill set who could kind of be, an agent for him. And they kind of came to an agreement, and Dean was happy to put aside his criminal past, take up a real job where he did something he's very good at and also is doing good for his people, as he believes. If he's your contact, he can give you all kinds of information: politics, the nobility, other important people, crime, comings and goings of all kinds of people, secret intentions of the people who come and go. He is rarely found in rural areas, but he can be found in any of the big cities. And he also knows a lot of other contacts, other people that are part of this kind of network. So you can still get the information from him even if you're not in a town where he is, quite often, through a second-hand guy who may also have the same information, who may be an informant or contact of Bannerman's himself. You can also, from Bannerman, if need be, get some really good equipment for certain specialist type jobs. He probably won't just give it to you, but he may let you borrow them, or at least or sell them to you at a reasonable price, depending on what it is. See, Fredegar de Vend is next. Fredegar was a noble from Timishburg, but his family had set up in Barrowmere in the hill country, and he had, as a teenager, was off visiting family in Timishburg when it came to light that the head of his family, Lord de Vend himself, was involved in human trafficking for occult sacrifices and all kinds of other crazy things. Rather than coming quietly when the Rangers, stiffened by the Lord Mayor's Guard of Barrowmere, came to arrest him, there was a big fight. Cultists of all stripes attacked the guard. In the end, there were dozens killed, including Lord de Vend himself. The manor burned down. The full story was hushed up, but snatches of it made their way like wildfire through the rumor mill for a long time. Young Fredegar, who was his nephew, again, he was away, but he was just horrified at these revelations that the head of his house and his uncle was a foul cultist and a murderer. He vowed to make it his life's work to root out this evil whenever he could. He still has some money, and his younger brother is a successful mercantilist and fur trader, so his money is supplemented by this, and he kind of is a patron who can give you all kinds of help with regards to stopping cultists in particular, but any kind of other supernatural evil. He's a font of side quests because he hears about all kinds of things that he doesn't have the wherewithal to go combat himself, but he doesn't want to leave any stone unturned if there's any kind of supernatural occultist or other type of evil threat like that. And he's also got the branch offices of his younger brother's mercantile pursuit, so you can get a lot of help from him, even, again, if he's not physically present. Although if he is, and this would be something very occasional, that a GM could even use him to stiffen a weaker party. He's a pretty tough nut. He's kind of like a combination traveling knight errant and inquisitor all at the same time. And he could potentially go on extremely tough but brief missions to help out as an extra consultant. Lord Ansteltane is next. He's another mercantile prince. He's based in Barrowmere, which is, of course, the capital of Southumbria. He is, however, a Northumbrian by birth, and he had been an important person up there. He actually was a former flame of the Grand Duke's wife, Josephine Duvandis. And although she married the Grand Duke and is now the Grand Duchess, he still kind of carries a torch for her to some degree, as rumors have started to spread of problems not only in their marriage but in their political situation. He's become very concerned, doesn't know if she needs rescuing or what's going on. So that's definitely a concern of his, and that's very closely tied to how the campaign will start. Because he's got mercantile pursuits all over the hill country and even beyond the hill country, he's got branch offices and other things that can help out as needed. Sir Lyman Reldane is the last of the contacts. He is a semi-retired former Shadow. Secretly, however, he's the head of the Shadow Division, which the Rangers what exactly did I say that right? He is the head of the Shadow Division, which the Rangers do not officially acknowledge, but it is kind of the X-Files division of the Rangers, if you will. And so that's what he runs. By the nature of his job, he has to sometimes work with some talented freelancers off the books. He's very careful about vetting people who do this, but if he's your contact, then you've already been pre-vetted, so good on you. He's a major side quest source and a font of information on how to successfully fight supernatural threats. If you are going up against werewolves or demons or whatever, he may even have access to silver or cold iron weapons or whatever you need in order to be successful in those combats. He's usually in Barrowmere. He does have kind of an official position, but because he runs the Shadow Division, he's got secretive contacts and agents kind of all over the place. They identify themselves with a special coin, and he'll send them around to not only help recruit freelancers, but also to make sure that his freelancers are equipped with what they need to be successful. So you can have him as a contact, and you don't necessarily need to talk to him personally in order to get his help. So anyway, that's kind of how this whole contact business works. I think I forgot to mention some of the other contacts who allow races. I do have all of the races except for Dampier are allowed if you pick the contact that allows it. So that's kind of my back door into saying, okay, you can only pick humans, but if you pick the right contact, you can actually pick one of these other races too. So all of them are available. Again, my group, only one of them picked another race, and it was kind of a familiar race. I mean, the orcs in Dark Fantasy X are a little different than they are in Lord of the Rings or Warhammer or whatever, but they're also close enough that everybody kind of knows what an orc is, right? So that's kind of how I get around that, and also give a source for potential new adventures, especially for players who don't know enough about the setting, don't know enough about what's going on to be super self-motivated right off the bat. In my experience, most players need some help finding the game, and then once they kind of get rolling, then they can become more self-motivated in terms of they have their own goals that they're going off and solving. But the contacts is not only a source of potential side quests and other kind of things, but it's also an interesting way to go get some help, some information, maybe even some gear on occasion that will allow them to be successful at what they're doing. So anyway, let's stop there and we'll talk about something else next time.